MMA fighters have quite a legacy like Carla Esparza, a strawweight pioneer who later crafted one of the sport's greatest career turnarounds, but is still widely regarded as one of the least popular champions in UFC history. Today, we look at Esparza's 14-year career and why fans found the Cookie Monster so hard to love. Welcome to the INC, and this is the story of Carla Esparza. Given her fighting style, it's no surprise Esparza's career began on the mats. Esparza's road began when she was competing for her high school wrestling team in California, winning multiple regional and national tournaments before becoming a two-time NAIA All-American. During this time, Esparza expanded her repertoire with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before transitioning to MMA under local coach Colin Oyama, the man who would guide Esparza through the entirety of her career. It didn't take long for Esparza to be thrown into the deep end. 6 months after her pro debut, Esparza accepted a call to compete in Bellator's Strawweight Grand Prix, replacing an injured Angela Magana on 3 days' notice. Esparza's opponent would be Megumi Fuji, an unbeaten powerhouse considered one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world, having claimed 13 of her 20 wins by first-round submission. Esparza managed to hold her own against the women's MMA legend, stuffing several of Fuji's takedown attempts in a competitive opening round before the Japanese fighter's submission attempts finally took their toll early in the second. Esparza's performance on short notice earned her a second Bellator call 10 months later, losing a split decision to top 5 strawweight Jessica Aguilar. For 5 years, those losses would be the only blemishes on Esparza's record. After beating Felice Herrig on the regional scene, Esparza was one of the first fighters signed to the all-female promotion Invicta, where successive wins earned her a match with Bec Rawlings for the inaugural strawweight title. Esparza would take her shot in the main event of Invicta 4, a card boasting future UFC stars Raquel Pennington and Rose Namajunas, as well as Amanda Nunes' one-sided loss to journeywoman Sarah D'Alelio. Luckily for Esparza, momentum would be on her side, using her superior wrestling to dominate Rawlings for the majority of the bout, although the Australian nearly caused a scare by dropping Esparza in the dying stages of the fifth. Esparza held on to claim the unanimous decision, and in doing so confirmed her place as one of 115's elite fighters. The fight, however, would be Esparza's last in Invicta. A title match with Ayaka Hamasaki fell through after Esparza suffered a knee injury, while a bout with Claudia Gadelha was canceled the day of the event after the Brazilian was admitted to hospital with food poisoning. Esparza's departure from Invicta, however, was out of her control. Boosted by the success of Ronda Rousey, the UFC announced plans for a strawweight division of their own in 2014, and signed several Invicta alum to fill out its roster. 16 women were cast on the 20th season of The Ultimate Fighter, with the winner being crowned the division's first champion. Thanks to her success in Invicta, Esparza was given the #1 seed, justifying her rank by submitting Angela Hill before decision wins over Tisha Torres and Jessica Penne. This earned Esparza a spot in the final and a match against 21-year-old rookie Rose Namajunas. Esparza's grappling would get the better of her opponent's raw potential. Her constant takedown attempts soon overwhelmed Namajunas, who was beginning to wilt as the fight entered the third round. Esparza was quick to capitalize, scoring another takedown in the opening seconds before finishing the Wisconsin fighter with a rear naked choke, securing her place in company lore in the process.
Namajunas trying to push that elbow out. She's
Here's the tap. Carla Esparza is the UFC strawweight champion of the world.
Esparza became only the second female champion in UFC history, justifying her place as a preseason favorite with the same smothering style that brought her so much success in Invicta. And while some held her career losses against her, the stature of her opponents along with her comparative inexperience at the time meant most were forgiving of her blemishes. It didn't take long for Esparza to find her next opponent. One day after her title win, Joanna Jędrzejczyk claimed a decision win over Claudia Gadelha at Fight Night Phoenix, setting the stage for a clash between the champion and the unbeaten Polish prospect. Esparza and Joanna's match took place in the co-main of UFC 185, with the Cookie Monster entering the bout as a -150 favorite. Esparza started strong with an early takedown, but appeared seemingly out of ideas once Joanna returned to her feet. From there, the tide took a dangerous turn as Joanna pieced Esparza apart while denying all the wrestler's takedown attempts. A second-round flurry proved too much for Esparza, as Joanna claimed the spoils in one of the most one-sided title fights in UFC history. The match tarred Esparza's standing among fans. Having been the toast of her division 4 months earlier, Esparza was dismissed as a one-dimensional relic who'd be found out once Strawweight evolved, a stigma the fighter never really shook off despite her success in the years after. This was seen in Esparza's next 2 fights, as her matches against Juliana Lima and Ronda Marcos were buried on the prelims of their respective cards. Esparza dominated Lima by unanimous decision before a controversial loss to hometown fighter Marcos at Fight Night Halifax. After rebounding against Marina Moroz, Esparza returned to the main card at UFC 219 against Cynthia Calvillo, an unbeaten prospect touted by Dana White as the next Ronda Rousey. Esparza fell victim to Calvillo's wrestling during a one-sided opening round, but her willingness to strike gave Esparza an opening over the next 2. While Esparza's striking was nothing to write home about, her aggressive approach and harder shots kept Calvillo on the defense. The former champion claimed the unanimous decision and threw a spanner into the UFC's plans for the division. Needless to say, the company didn't take kindly to Esparza playing spoiler, booking her against longtime challenger Claudia Gadelha before a one-sided destruction against the unbeaten Tatiana Suarez. Little did fans know, it would be Esparza's last loss for the next 5 years. Esparza continued her gatekeeping role for her next 4 fights, claiming a string of well-aging wins as the UFC entered the lockdown era. A Fight of the Night performance over Alexa Grasso was followed by wins over Marina Rodriguez and Vina Jandiroba, Esparza handing both Brazilian prospects their first career loss. After beating Michelle Waterson at UFC 249, Esparza had finally clawed her way back to the strawweight top 5, but it was soon clear the UFC were reluctant for her to progress further. At the time, strawweight was in the midst of its Four Queens era, with its reigning and former champions facing one another in a series of critically acclaimed bouts, and the company were less than enthused about the wrestling-heavy Esparza messing with the formula. This became clear in September of 2020 when Esparza was booked against another touted Brazilian in Amanda Ribas, only for Esparza to withdraw from the bout and Ribas instead faced Marina Rodriguez at UFC 257. Esparza, meanwhile, was instead booked against Yan Xiaonan in a co-main event at the UFC Apex. The fight would be the best of Esparza's renaissance, taking Yan down in the opening seconds, with the Chinese fighter looking lost against her opponent's wrestling, best evidenced when she nearly armbarred herself in a mid-round scramble. Esparza soon bludgeoned Yan with elbows before finishing the fight midway through the second. If the UFC was to take Esparza seriously as a title threat, she'd just given them the strongest argument possible.
Carla Esparza, 5 straight wins, and a pretty good argument to be next in line.
Esparza's win saw her amass the longest winning streak in the strawweight division. While her wrestling-heavy style still attracted naysayers, the majority of fans now saw Esparza as worthy of a title fight. But while logic pointed to the former champion getting the next shot, the UFC again hesitated, instead booking a rematch between Zhang Weili and Rose Namajunas, despite Weili being finished in just over a minute. Esparza's days playing company woman were over. Her next fight would be for the belt, even if she was willing to wait for it. 12 months after her last fight, the Cookie Monster's patience finally paid off. Esparza earned her shot at UFC 274 against Rose Namajunas, the same woman she had beaten to win the strawweight crown at 2014. The fighter Esparza now faced, however, was a different beast. Under the guidance of coach Trevor Whitman, Namajunas had evolved into strawweight's most dangerous striker, holding the distinction of beating every other strawweight champion outside of Esparza. With a clash of styles and the history of their first bout, many tipped the match as one of the most intriguing fights of an already stacked card. Those same fans, however, would be left very, very disappointed.
I'm looking at these punch stats, and it's 3 for 22 and 3 for 17. I haven't seen 39 strikes in this round.
For the entirety of the bout, Esparza and Namajunas just circled one another. Namajunas fearful of Esparza's takedowns, while the Cookie Monster was too scared to shoot due to the counter-striking of her opponent. All while the Phoenix crowd booed the inaction viciously. The judges, however, needed to pick a winner, so they gathered between themselves, flipped a coin, and hoped for the best.
UFC Undisputed!
7 years and 5 months after the first Namajunas fight, Esparza had regained the strawweight title. The woman once dismissed as a relic after her match with Joanna was back at the top of women's MMA's toughest summit. What should have been a celebration for a hardened veteran was instead vilified by the MMA community. Namajunas vs. Esparza 2 is widely regarded as one of the worst title fights of all time, and added with the negative stigma of her early career, led some fans to consider the Cookie Monster a fraudulent champion. The fight, however, did give Esparza her something new, so to speak, as just a few days later, the fighter married her childhood sweetheart. The tainted win followed Esparza into her first title defense with Zhang Weili at UFC 281, with the Cookie Monster entering the match as a sizable underdog. While Esparza had moments of success, she was overwhelmed by the all-rounded skill set of Weili, succumbing to a second-round submission and effectively retconning her title reign at the first opportunity. By this point, Esparza had turned her attention away from the cage, taking 2 years off to give birth to her son before announcing her return bout at UFC 307 would be her last in MMA. The UFC, in response, showed their sentimental side by burying the match on the Fight Pass portion of the card. Esparza's opponent would be the now Tisha Pennington, one of the women Esparza beat on her first road to the title. Esparza reminded fans of her former glory with takedown attempts throughout the bout, but ultimately failed to keep up with Pennington's striking on her way to a decision loss. Pennington earned the judge's nod, but the post-fight fallout belonged to Esparza. It had taken 14 years in the last chapter of her career, but the former champion finally earned the respect she had long deserved.
It's not always easy, there's ups and downs in the sport, but I wouldn't have done it any other way. This is the greatest sport in the world. And thank you to all the UFC fans. Man, I love this sport. Thank you guys so much.
Carla Esparza holds acclaim as one of the most misjudged champions of all time. Her early career established strawweight as the marquee women's division and showed a great resolve to stay relevant as the division evolved around her, but with modern fans placing entertainment at a premium, her grappling-heavy style invited more criticism than was ultimately warranted. Esparza's achievements rank as some of the most unique in MMA history. Let's hope that the sport's wider community will one day come to appreciate it. This is the INC. Please like, share, and subscribe. Post your feedback in the comments and donate to our Patreon page for exclusive content.